reminder of our top stories here this evening. And Spain is on course for a constitutional showdown after the Catalan Prime Minister pulled back from a compromise solution over the region's plan for independence. The Spanish Parliament is expected to start taking control of Catalonia tomorrow. The Labour MP Rosie Cooper has thanked police for keeping her safe after the alleged leader of a far-right group was charged with encouraging her murder. And a woman who fantasised about beheading the columnist Katie Hopkins has been found guilty of helping her partner prepare a terror attack by buying a life-size dummy so that he could practice killing people. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be seeing what's making the headlines with the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Sodha. So good evening to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages. And The Guardian reports that high street sales are falling at their fastest rate since the recession. The Metro leads with the charges laid against the alleged leader of a neo-Nazi group for allegedly encouraging the killing of a Labour MP. The Times says 2 alleged members of the banned group have now been charged. The Financial Times reports that the euro has taken a hit as the European Central Bank extends its economic stimulus programme. In The Telegraph, claims that police in England and Wales are letting criminals off the hook as arrest numbers halve. The Daily Mail says that's despite a surge in crime. Predictions: the UK's population will top 70 million before the year 2030 leads the Express. The Daily Mirror has the story of a mum saved by a lung transplant before being given away at her wedding by the father of her donor. The Sun reports that cabinet ministers are amongst MPs who've been named as sex pests in a message group circulated at Westminster. While The Star reports an EastEnders storyline is causing controversy amongst viewers. So an array of different stories there on the front pages to discuss with Isabel Oakeshott and Sonia Sodha. And it's actually the Daily Express that you've picked out first of all. Their headlines there are on the projections for the direction in which our population is growing and by what extent. Their take on it: migrants send our population soaring.
Yeah, and no surprise that the Express has splashed on this because Express readers, like much of the population, are extremely concerned about the incredible level of population rise in recent years. And you said that the slant on it is because that they focused on migrants, but that is actually at the heart of the story here. More than half of the projected 4.5 million, nearly 4.5 million increase in the next few years will be due to migration. And I think this is a really important story. I think much of what we've seen in politics in the last year is linked to the huge public concern about population growth. We're an island. We don't have room to keep accommodating people on this scale. This amount of migration is completely unsustainable for this country. The pressure on public services and so on and so forth probably leads us to where we are now in politics. Sonia's got her sceptical face on. I'm loving the anticipation of hearing your defence of this crazy population growth.
Over to you, Sonia.
Well, I certainly wouldn't say it's crazy. In fact, it's 4.4 million to almost 70 million by the end of the next decade. And I think there are a couple of things to say about this. First of all, it's actually lower than people have been projecting forwards previously. I think that's quite important.
I think it's brought that 70 million figure pushed it back by 2 years from an original estimate.
Right, so there you go. But also, I don't think we need to be concerned about population growth. Indeed, I think we should be welcoming it for 2 reasons. First of all, I think it's absolutely ridiculous to say that Britain is overpopulated. A tiny percentage of our land and our countryside is populated. To say that we don't have room to grow a bit, it just doesn't make sense.
Sure, everyone could go and live in like northwest Scotland where there isn't anything to actually do in terms of the economy there and the jobs that are available.
But
it's ludicrous to argue that there isn't actually space.
The second point is really, it's wrong to say, well, it's going to put a strain on our public services. Well, only if we don't expand our public services. And a lot of the people who come here through migration, they come here to work, they have jobs, they pay taxes. One of the things that's caused pressure on our public services is actually austerity and government not spending enough of tax revenues on public services. And then the final point is that we've got an ageing population and our fertility rates have dropped recently. So unless we import some labour, unless we have some migrants coming in, working in things like the NHS, for example, we're actually just going to not have enough working people to pay their taxes.
So what about that point?
Sonia, her two arguments are completely contradictory. You say that it'll all be fine if we expand public services. We don't have the specialists to do that. We barely can manage to fill the NHS jobs that we have. So how are you going to just at the snap of a finger expand public services to accommodate this massively rising population over a very short period?
The bigger problem for public services is a lack of hard cash, austerity. Again, you can actually bring in extra specialists through migration. And for example, actually, a lot of the migration inwards has been for public services like the NHS. The problem is that the biggest users of public services are actually older people. So if you look at the NHS, it's the older people who tend to use it because they tend to get sicker, understandably. But that problem is going to get worse unless you have the levels of migration you need to have workers to staff the NHS.
It partly comes down to what kind of country you want. Have you ever been to Hong Kong, Sonia?
I haven't actually.
Well, I think if you went to Hong Kong and saw what it's like to be grotesquely overcrowded in a very small space,
that's not
your view of, well, it already is happening in southeast England, isn't it? It already is.
What about the issue of geography that Isabel was talking about there? I mean, there are certain centres that there is likely to be more work and people are more likely to travel to. What about the issues of housing in those areas?
I think you have to invest in housing, you have to invest in infrastructure, and I'd like to see a lot more upfront cash from this government going into these things, particularly because the rates at which government can borrow are so low. For me, it's a no-brainer to be investing in that sort of stuff.
What about future generations? We just carry on borrowing. I mean, this is...
No, Isabel. It pays for itself because of the return that it generates.
Isn't the case. That just isn't the case. That is not a
then the other thing I think is we need to think about regional growth and ensuring, and I think, you know, with things like HS2, if we really invested in our broadband network, it would be easier to for people to be sort of more evenly distributed around the country. And I do think there's too much still concentrated in London and the South East.
Okay, let's move on to other issues and see if we can get a good argument going on those as well. The front page of the Telegraph is your next choice, and I think it's a similar story on the front of the Daily Mail as well. Arrests fall by half despite a rise in crime is their headline there.
Sonia can put a soft left spin on this one.
Well, no, actually, I think, I mean, the first thing to say is that crime is rising on some measures, but actually, if you look at, in terms of the number of the crime that the police record, if you look at the big survey of crime, it actually doesn't look like it's rising that much at all. There is some forms of violent crime that are rising, but I do think that this story highlights something quite important, which there has been a dramatic drop in the total number of arrests. And actually, I think this is concerning. There's this theory of crime called the broken windows theory of crime, which says that, you know, if you don't police the low-level stuff, so quite petty crime, you know, minor burglaries, it's not like I think you should be sending those people to prison, but there's got to be some disincentive there. If you don't police the minor stuff, things get worse when you look at the more serious stuff. And I think that is probably something that we should be concerned about. I think it's concerning if, you know, burglaries, for example, police aren't taking action because they just haven't got the resources.
And that's kind of the message in that subheading there, isn't it? Police accused of sending message to criminals that they can get away with
it. And I think there is a risk of that. And I think that's partly actually because the police are incredibly stretched at the moment. And austerity and you know, cuts to police funding means that we are seeing fewer police officers on the streets.
Maybe you've got a great solution here, which is to import loads and loads of people and they can fill the police with lots of extra crime busters. No, actually, it's to fund the police properly.
Why do you think this is happening? Here's the Daily Mail's take on it. Arrest figures plunge by half, they say. Do you think it's because the police are stretched with...
Well, I think the police absolutely are stretched. I mean, you know, I'm not going to defend the scale of cuts to the police force. You know, it has been very, very difficult for them. Successive Home Office ministers have argued that it's possible to keep on producing miracles with less and less, and actually with less you can do less, you know, bottom line. So this isn't great. And, you know, if you are very thinly spread, then of course you're going to have to prioritise and probably not pursue the pettier crime. And as Sonia said, I actually agree with her, you know, the broken window theory, whereby if you let the little stuff go, then it will escalate.
OK, let's move on to another story that you've picked out. This is inside the Daily Express. It was on a lot of front pages this morning as well, wasn't it? NHS should back off this Airbnb bed scheme. And this is the scheme whereby some people recuperate in volunteers' houses in return for
literally couldn't believe this story when I read it. I was like, is this some kind of April Fool, this idea that, you know, the NHS is somehow going to ease pressure on its services linked to rising population and immigration? Are they going to do this by kind of farming out patients into private homes around in the area? I mean, it just seems absolutely fatuous. I cannot see this can possibly work.
Do you think this could have an impact, given that that obviously the need for beds is great within hospitals, and some people aren't ready to go home on their own, they need more recuperation? Is there a way of somehow helping them in the community, if you like, and freeing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, you can just see so much that could go wrong with this scheme, couldn't you? You know, the safeguarding concerns, so are people going to be safe in these houses where people are renting out rooms for £50 a night? What are the motivations of people doing it? So there's a lot that could go wrong. I can sort of see the kernel of the idea here, though, and I think, you know, it would need to... I'd be more comfortable, for example, if it was being operated by a charity, if people signing up to it, there was some sort of vetting process to ensure that they were signing up to it for the right reasons.
I think there is a vetting process. I think
there is a vetting process, but I think it will be sort of... I mean, to be honest, we don't have the full details. It sounded like it would be very much around kind of criminal checks and you know, safeguarding checks. But I think, you know, if people are willing to give up a room in their home, sort of, you know, yes, and get some compensation for it, but they're doing it for the right reasons, you know, you could see that working. But I mean, I think there is an awful lot that could go wrong, and I think the concern is that the NHS, like the police, as we've discussed, is incredibly stretched. And so are care services in the community, and ideally people would be going out and being looked after by professional care services. So I think there are some very legitimate concerns that this is the NHS just trying to buy in some care on the cheap because they can't afford professional care.
And I think at this stage it's just a trial that's being proposed, so it's not exactly policy at the moment anyway. Right, lots more to talk about after the break, including why retail sales are falling at rates not seen since the height of the recession. We'll be talking about that in a moment.